And welcome everyone to Sports Talk Line, where we talk sports 24/7, 365. And on this week's episode for Battle of the Big East, we're going to talk about the Villanova Wildcats with Emma Houghton. Emma, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Excited to be here. Excited to talk Nova hoops.
Yes, I'm pretty sure also excited that they're making the Sweet 16. And a lot of people came in beforehand. Everyone thought Villanova was dead in the water. You know, they came in, they lost by 1 to Georgetown because Georgetown didn't miss a free throw. Whether that was karma for the 1985 championship game, we don't know. And a lot of the reason why people were questioning Villanova was because of Colin Gillespie's injury, you know. But it looks like who has stepped up for Villanova since Colin Gillespie was injured?
Yeah, Patrick Ewing probably likes to think that it was karma for 1985, right? But I mean, I don't think it just took Villanova fans. It just gutted people when Colin got hurt. I think it truly gutted the entire college basketball world because Gillespie is just such a natural-born college basketball player. He truly peaked this year. He was on to even better things than he was expected to do, and then he torn that MCL. But I truly think there are two young guys that step up in Gillespie's absence that nobody saw coming. And the first guy is Chris Arcidiacono. Hopefully you recognize that name. He's Ryan Arcidiacono's brother. That was pretty much the only thing he was lauded for in his first season and a half. And then when Colin went down, this kid has run the point so exceptionally well, better than anybody could have expected, more than Jay Wright could have expected, even though he will never admit that. I mean, he's turned the ball over twice since the Providence game, where he's gotten 25 plus minutes. All those games, the last 2 games of the season and the 2 games in the tournament, he stepped up, not necessarily scoring, but just ball handling. He's an absolute legend on defense. We've also got Brian Antoine, who's just dealt with a lot of expectations. He was a McDonald's All-American in high school. Injuries derailed him. He's had trouble adjusting to the system. But in Gillespie's absence, I think he's been able to step into a role where he can produce. And he's had 6 and 8 points, respectively, in the tournament. I think it's huge for his confidence, if nothing else, especially now that the team needs him. And then the obvious answer here is Jeremiah Robinson-Earl. Him and Gillespie were the tandem all season long, but especially in this tournament, Robinson-Earl has stepped up and become the All-American snub, maybe, that he was meant to be all season long.
Yeah, I think, with Gillespie getting hurt, that brings up a point. But seeing that name, Arcidiacono, I think people in Chapel Hill, North Carolina might cringe at that. And it just, and you could also say, too, I'm going to throw this out there. Maybe it was the ghost of John Thompson.
Yep. That
stepped up there during the Big East one. A lot of, and you got to give credit for Villanova going forward. And, as we do an analysis of Villanova, one of the things I'll point out to is, what do you think is the strength or are the strengths of Villanova basketball at this time?
Yeah, so at this time is an important point, because I think if this had been a month ago, I would say very different things than what I'm about to say right now. But while the Cats had Colin Gillespie, it was shooting, it was their pace of play, it was being able to drive and kick and have all those excellent shooters on the perimeter that could hit a shot. Now, I think the biggest thing going in Villanova's favor is their head coach, Jay Wright. I think the experience that he brings, the pedigree and the reputation that Villanova has, it's their 7th time in the Sweet 16 in the last 20 seasons. A lot of people, we were talking right before we hit record, a lot of people counted Villanova out. It's been the first time in a while, I think, that Villanova fans have felt vindicated, especially when all those analysts took the popular Winthrop pick over Nova. But I think Jay Wright having a week to prepare for Winthrop, and then the winner of the round 32 game, having a week to prepare against Baylor, even if that one's a bit harder of an opponent, having Jay Wright at the helm, I think, automatically puts Villanova in a different category. And then they do have the shooters more. They have Robinson-Earl in the post. I think he's one of the biggest, or the most athletic big man. And I put that in quotes because he's not a natural center, but what he can do in the post, I think that continues to get better and better as the season gets on.
Yeah. And also, we talked about the strengths, and, we got to look at the other side of the coin, which are the weaknesses. from the time I followed Villanova, especially since realignment of the Big East, I felt like they always get in trouble the field of 32 game when they go up against big physical teams that are usually more athletic. And usually when you look at all those losses, you see a lot of threes and a lot of misses. Now, are those still the weaknesses of Villanova, or do you see a different weakness now that other teams could exploit, or maybe they just can't exploit it right now?
Absolutely. You said exactly what I was going to say. And I think it's really important to note that it's athletic big men, because Jeremiah Robinson Earl did very well against DJ Burns on Winthrop, who I think was 6'9", 6'10", but he wasn't able to move in the post. Robinson Earl in the past has also done well against guys at Kansas in years prior, like Udoka Azubuike. When Robinson Earl struggles in the post, it's against guys like Nate Watson on Providence and Qudus Wahab on Georgetown, who have the footwork, the athleticism to get things done. I never would have thought this before. The shots aren't falling. Even with Gillespie there, sometimes they have off days. I definitely don't think shooting is as much of a strength as it was when Gillespie was there. And then the last thing I'll note, it doesn't have as much of a point of emphasis coming off of the last win over North Texas. But I think bench depth is a problem for Villanova. And I think having to count on Cole Swider, Brian Antoine, Chris Archidiakono, even guys that haven't seen big moments is a big ask. And they've performed well so far. But even coming into the season, having 6, 7, 8 options versus 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like some teams you see in the tournament, puts Villanova at a disadvantage.
Yeah, and we kind of hinted at it before. Villanova is going up against the big bad Bears and Baylor. Personally, if you asked me a week ago, I would say Baylor I would pick to win the national title. But
over the Zags?
Yeah, I would pick Baylor over Gonzaga because I think the Big 12, the iron sharpens iron, and there's a reason why no one has gone undefeated since 1976. One is conference tournaments, and two, I just think there's too much pressure. Kentucky wilted, and there was a lot more talent there. And I think Gonzaga, I can see them going to the Final Four, and they're going up against Creighton. But I can see maybe Baylor taking out Gonzaga. But, we kind of mentioned it before, too. Now, Jay Wright has a full week to plan for Baylor. And I really think Baylor, they're athletic, they play defense. They're a team that can cause matchup problems for Villanova historically. But it's also, to beat Baylor, you need to play flawless basketball. And if Villanova is at its best, we kind of didn't see it, but we saw it in the field of 32 game. They started to play flawless basketball when they're knocking down the outside shots. They're getting stops defensively as a totally different dimension. But what does Villanova and Jay Wright need to do to get that win, get that huge upset win against Baylor?
Yeah, it would be a huge upset. And I think the 5 is misleading at this point because they are without Gillespie. But I think you hit the nail on the head again. I think Villanova might have played their game of flawless basketball one game too soon. They obviously crushed North Texas. It was excellent to see all those shots falling, but they're going to have to play better than they did against North Texas to beat Baylor. And I'm just not sure how realistic that is. I think specific things you can work on. You can work on perimeter defense. Jay Wright to his team. That's something Nova struggled with all season long, and they're going up against probably the best guards they've seen all season in Davion Mitchell and Jared Butler and Maseo Teague. Actually, this just popped into my head, but probably the game against Texas was the most athletic guard tandem that Villanova has faced, and they came away with the win in that game. But Baylor just puts it all together. They have the guards. They're obviously known for being the best three-point shooting team in the nation. Another thing I think Villanova can do, and they do this all season long, under Jay Wright's era, honestly, they just pick away at teams, and they do that by controlling the pace. Baylor runs a very fast tempo. Villanova runs an extremely slow tempo. If Villanova can do their part in trying to control, and another way they do that is by not turning the ball over, which is something they're very good at, maybe they can just limit this Baylor offense, and then they're going to need Cole Swider to shoot the lights out. They're going to need Caleb Daniels to shoot the lights out. They're going to need another 8 points from Antoine. It's going to be a huge team effort if they're going to take the Baylor Bears down.
Yeah, I think this is a game where Villanova needs to play from ahead. They can't cut back because they're not really as equipped as playing fast like Baylor is. Mm-hmm. But it's also, too, when Villanova loses, they very rarely lose one possession games. So I will say that usually when Villanova loses, it's usually by multiple possessions. To say that, but it's also, we when you look at Villanova, since the realignment of the Big East, they pretty much won at least a share of the regular season title, I believe 7 out of 8 times. And it almost became, they've won 2 national titles in 2016 and 2018. It's almost, when you look at Villanova in the Big East, they have a different bar when it comes to what is a successful season. As the season stands now, a Sweet 16 berth, is that a successful season for Villanova?
100%. Going into this season, I think it was Final Four or bust. And I think if this team still had Colin Gillespie, it would have been Final Four or bust. This would have been potentially the best game of the tournament, Villanova versus Baylor at full strength. With that being said, the fact that this team won 1 game in the tournament, I think is so impressive. I think that should be the epitome of a successful tournament, and all the credit goes to Jay Wright and his coaching staff's game plan, all these players just gritting it out. The fact that they're even facing Baylor, you can argue that they had a weaker, easier field than a lot of other teams had to go through, but North Texas beat Purdue, so that makes them a legitimate opponent. I think Villanova would have run into more problems against Purdue, but we didn't have to deal with that. But the fact that Jay Wright was able to get the most out of each player on this roster. You saw Trey Patterson come into the game against North Texas. Mm-hmm. He's done such an incredible job. And to have a team gutted like Villanova was when Colin Gillespie left on March 3rd to mount a comeback like this, I truly think it's one of the most surprising runs of any team in the tournament, along with Syracuse and Oral Roberts, because this team's ceiling was cut in half when Gillespie went down. So I still can't believe Villanova made it this far. I can't believe how well they played in the past 2 games. And while I don't think they'll come away with the win against Baylor, I think they can make it tough, and I'm excited for that.
Yeah, it needs to be flawless. I think, Villanova is playing with house money, especially with the injury for Gillespie. But before we leave, the NCAA gave everyone a free waiver. They acted like Oprah. Everyone gets a free year. So every player for this winter, when it comes to basketball, gets another year of eligibility. You mentioned Nate Watson. Guess what? He's coming back to Providence next year.
Yep.
I think everyone outside of Providence in the Big East is not happy about it, but Providence fans are overjoyed, and they're going to need him. And I really think with Gillespie's injury, this totally changes the dynamic. But, what do you think are the chances that Colin Gillespie is like, you know what? I need to rehab this injury. I don't know what my draft stock is. I'm going to come back next year. Do you see Colin Gillespie playing next year and taking advantage of this extra year of eligibility?
I'm really torn. I really have been going back and forth, and the injury adds a whole nother aspect to it, because without the injury aside, I think he would have had to take stock in what his draft stock really was. And especially if he had a full season, maybe he would have been on a second or third team All-American. Maybe he could have been single player of Big East Player of the Year, not co-player of the year with 2 other guys. But I lean no that he won't come back, just because I think the injury adds another wild card. You don't know how he's going to recover. You think that MCL is relatively routine recovery, but I think Colin Gillespie has accomplished everything that he's wanted to accomplish at the college level. He could come back and try and win the Wooden Player of the Year. I think that is in his expectations. It's obviously so unfortunate that he didn't get to play in March Madness in 2 straight years because of COVID, especially. That's gutting. But I lean that Colin Gillespie won't come back, because I think he did everything he needed to do at the college level. And I think he looks to the future and sees what his outlook looks like at the professional level. I think that's what he's going to do.
All right. And thinking about, making wise decisions, hopefully you make a wise decision and hit that like and subscribe button for Sports Talkline. We're already at 209,000 subscribers and growing. But before we leave, Emma, can you tell everyone where we can find you on social media?
Definitely. So my personal Twitter is at Emma_Houghton9. And I host a podcast called Did You Hear? It's general sports, but I graduated from Villanova along with my co-host. So we do a lot of Villanova content. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Did You Hear Pod.
All right. Thanks for coming on, Emma. And remember, everyone at home, listen like you play with intensity.